Hello, and welcome to Philosophy 417 Analytic Philosophy. I'm your instructor, Jonathan Suravel. So, this is a topic that's really interesting to me. It's a philosophical tradition that's interesting to me. My dissertation was on a major analytic philosopher, Rudolf Carnap. He's sometimes called a logical empiricist or logical positivist. I've published articles in the analytic philosophy of science, epistemology, ethics, and the history of analytic philosophy. For the last few years, actually, I've been focused on a different kind of project. It's called argument mapping. It's a way of teaching critical thinking. And if you're interested about that, shoot me a message. I can elaborate a little bit, but that's just a little bit about me and my interests. On a more personal level, I live in Austin, Texas. I've got a 5-year-old daughter. I live with my wife. I'm originally from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. All right, so a couple other things I'll do in this video. I'll say a little bit about what analytic philosophy is, or what I take it to be, because it's actually sort of a subject of debate. What is analytic philosophy exactly? And then after that, I'll say a couple things about the course site. Not a whole lot, actually. I don't have a whole lot to say about the site. I think it's fairly straightforward, but I'll mention a few basics. So, analytic philosophy, what is it? Well, you might think that it's philosophy that's especially analytic, that involves a lot of analysis, stuff like giving definitions of concepts or terms. And a lot of early analytic philosophy did focus on that. My guy, Rudolf Carnap, was really into analysis and definitions. But I don't think this is a good definition of analytic philosophy for two reasons. Number one, there are a lot of philosophers who are not analytic philosophers who give definitions or who engage in analysis. Secondly, there are a lot of analytic philosophers who don't do those things. So there is some connection to analysis, historically speaking. There is some connection between analytic philosophy and analysis. But I wouldn't say that it's necessary or sufficient for someone being an analytic philosopher that they engage in that kind of analysis or definition. Another thing that's somewhat distinctive of analytic philosophy is an emphasis on logic, as in formal logic. If you've studied this, you might know what I mean by it. It's kind of hard to explain to somebody who hasn't studied it, but sort of formal proofs, the kind that are given in mathematics in particular. Many of the early analytic philosophers were especially interested in logic. There's probably the first philosopher who's considered an analytic philosopher was named Gottlob Frege, a German philosopher. And he used logic. He developed a new system of logic that's become sort of the dominant method of logic in math and philosophy and other disciplines. And he used it to elucidate the notion of a proof in mathematics. And he also used it along with what's called set theory to analyze, define number concepts and arithmetical concepts. Bertrand Russell was another very influential analytic philosopher who did a lot of logic, formal logic. Rudolf Carnap, the guy I like so much, did formal logic. So did this other analytic philosopher, Quine. So again, there is a connection there, especially historically. However, once again, there are lots of philosophers who are not analytic philosophers who did logic. Aristotle and Leibniz would be two examples. And there are lots of analytic philosophers who don't do logic. So once again, there's a historical connection, but it's not constitutive of analytic philosophy. It's not necessary for it or sufficient for it. So what is analytic philosophy then? Well, I think of it as basically just a historical period of philosophy. kind of like how there's ancient Chinese philosophy, there's medieval European philosophy, there's 19th century American philosophy, there's 20th century what's called continental philosophy, which is like a philosophical tradition starting with these guys Husserl, Heidegger, and a few others. Some people would actually trace it back further than that. And then another sort of historical tradition is analytic philosophy. It begins with that philosopher I mentioned, Gottlob Frege, in the late 19th century. And then other philosophers responded to him, and a sort of debate and discussion developed. Bertrand Russell was another key figure in that. G.E. Moore, a couple of British philosophers, and then Carnap and others. So I think of it as a historical tradition of philosophers who were in conversation with each other, who, one person like Frege and Russell, they'd set the agenda, they ask certain questions, they use certain methods, and then other people respond to them. And there's this chain of responses and counter responses. And sometimes the methods are the same, sometimes the positions are the same, the presuppositions are the same, but sometimes not. Sometimes this chain of responses goes in a very different direction. And we see the same thing with things like medieval European philosophy or ancient Chinese philosophy. Okay, so that's my take on analytic philosophy. Different people have different takes, okay? It's a debated question. What is analytic philosophy? Having discussed that, let me go over the course site a little bit. If you're taking this course, you have taken courses at APUS before, and you've probably seen similar course sites with similar structure. There is a weekly content module. So if you click content like I just did here, there are all these modules, one for each week. Course overview and introduction, good place to start. That's sort of like week 0, so that gets kind of lumped in with week 1. And so each content module has learning material, stuff to read, sometimes videos. Okay, there are recommended readings here in readings and resources. Okay, Sense and Reference is actually an article by that guy I mentioned, Gottlob Frege. Classic article. All right, so I think you get the picture. My computer is loading. Okay, one of the great articles in the philosophy of language. And you can see here where the idea of analysis comes from, right? This is really analyzing different notions of linguistic meaning. Okay. I'm doing this video while my daughter watches Bluey in the room next to me. Been kind of a busy day, actually, doing parental duties all day while my wife is sick in bed. Okay, so we're talking about the content modules. We've got readings, original texts like that, and then we've also got different secondary sources and summaries, including ones that were written by the course designer at APUS. Then there are also activities and assessments in each content module. So there's going to be at least one discussion every week. Actually, I don't know if it's every week. Sorry. There are discussions most weeks. And then on some weeks, there are essays as well, essay type assignments. Some of them might be like assignments that are preliminary to an essay, building up to one. I'm not going to go over those assignments in this video. And I actually probably won't go over them at all because I find them pretty straightforward. Okay, it's sort of a standard essay assignment, but I'm happy to answer questions about them. And that's really all I have to say about the course site. Like I say, if you've taken an APUS course before, you've navigated courses like this. I guess one other thing I could say is I strongly recommend reading the syllabus. That goes for any course. You can get to it in course tools, like so. And so good luck with the course. I hope you find it as interesting as I do. I find all these readings incredibly interesting. And for that reason, I really enjoy teaching it. I always learn from my students in this course. And I look forward to reading your thoughts on these topics.